Hello everybody and welcome to a brand new Elder Scrolls Online build video with me, Sherman. Today guys, we're going to be taking a look at the Infernal DK or Dragon Knight, and this build is a solo build. It is primarily made for solo play. It can solo a lot of content. I wouldn't say everything like most of my solo builds can, but with enough skill in playing with and stuff like that, you can get to that point where you could be good enough to take on a lot more than what I can. So the build itself is very hybridized in a way, but you don't have to play it this way. You can play it with just staff on both bars. I do like to use it two-handed, primarily because it gives me a different tool to use on the front bar, and it gives me a little bit more spell damage when I have that on the front bar. So let's go ahead and take a look at the build. Starting with what we are a Dark Elf Dragon Knight. Dark Elf isn't like the most superb, but with the way I play it, it is the better option because it does give you weapon damage and it does give you spell damage. So that's kind of a thing. We do have 64 points in a Magicka, 33k max Magicka, 21k health, 20k stamina with a 1666 mag recovery, and this is unbuffed. 611 stamina recovery. We do have, like I said, 2712 spell damage with a 46% spell critical. We have a 15k spell resist, a 13k physical resist, and that is unbuffed. I'm going to go ahead and show you guys what it looks like buffed. We have 20k spell resist with a 18k physical resist. This gives you just enough to be survivable for a lot of the non-DLC vet dungeons and to solo them. When it comes to like things like Maelstrom Arena, a lot of people are going to ask me, can this do Maelstrom Arena? It can if you use dual fire staves instead of a sword and fire staff. So, alright, moving on. We have Tri-Stat Food, of course. We are using the Atronach Mundus Stone for higher recovery because the Dragon Knight has no source of mag recovery built into the class. We are using actually a lot of mag recovery on this build, so we get that higher magic recovery because of how much resources we do burn through. We want to be able to get them back successfully, so we will be switching between the front bar and the back bar quite a bit. Heavy attacking a lot on the back bar. Alright, moving on now to our gear and equipment. Starting with the food, we are using Tri-Stat Food, of course. This is going to be the better option for you because it's going to give you a higher pool of stamina. It's going to give you a good amount of Magicka and, of course, health. Next up, you can use Tripods. This is actually what I would prefer or would suggest most people using because you're going to be getting most of your other buffs from other things. So like your spell crit and your spell and weapon damage increase, the major prophecy, major sorcery, that stuff is going to be coming from other things that you already have built into the class, so it's not necessarily like a requirement. Alright, going over the gear, starting with our monster set, we are using Grothars. Grothars is really good for an up close build because you are pretty much just right in the face of the enemy anyways, and it's going to drop a lot of fire around you, doing a lot of damage over time, and the effect of this can last for 8 seconds, or 8 meters, and every 5 seconds, and then every 10 seconds it can occur on a 10% chance. This thing's just pretty much non-stop firing, so. Next up, we do have our secondary set, which is Julianus. This is primarily the best solo light armor set you can get, and that's pretty much because it gives you the spell crit, max Magicka spell crit, and then spell damage. Moving on to the next set, and this is where people are going to question things, and that is because we are using the Akhavari Dragon Guard set. Now this gives mag recovery, healing taken, max health, and then reduced cost of your ultimate abilities. The primary reason why we're using the Akhavari Dragon Guard is the reduced cost of ultimate abilities. DK ultimates and like staff ultimates are super expensive. So this gives you a way to reduce the cost of your abilities enough to make them worthwhile. So, alright, Now we're going to go over traits and enchant, starting with the monster set, of course. We are using, or the smaller pieces, sorry. We are using 4 Divines, light armor build. So we have Divines on the shoulders, the gloves, the belt, and the boots. And those are your primary light armor pieces besides your head. The reason for the Divines, of course, is enhance the effect of your Munda Stone. The Max Magic is there to boost your Magicka pool. Now on the smaller pieces, the smaller body pieces, the head and the legs, we are using Invigorating with Tri-Stat enchants, and the chest also has a Tri-Stat enchant, but the chest is heavy reinforced to give us that little bit of kick in our resistance. And then the same thing goes with our leggings. We are using the increased the recovery, or Invigorating with the enchantments. And this is just to give you a good resource pool with a good resource recovery. If you wanted to do something else here, you could do the heavy helm, but I would always suggest going with the crafted heavy chest. It works out a lot better. Moving on to the jewelry, we are using 2 spell damage enchants on Trirune rings, of course, and then the necklace is infused with mag recovery. Onto the weapons, our primary weapon, and like I said, I have a staff here as well, but our primary weapon will always be Nirnhoned with a flame damage enchant. And then on the back bar, we are going to use an infused Absorb Magicka. And this way, when we have our Wall of Elements down, we're constantly getting Magicka back every so many seconds. This helps us sustain a lot better. Alright, now that you guys have seen that, let's move on to skills. Starting with the skills we have on our primary bar, we have our first ability, which is Molten Whip. This is a spammable. We will be using this primarily as our spammable. It does a lot of flame damage, as you can see. It can also set enemies off balance if that enemy is immobilized or stunned. While slotted, when you activate a different Ardent Flame ability, you gain a stack of Seething Fury, which increases the damage of your next Molten Whip ability by 33%. And your weapon and spell damage by 75 for 5 seconds. This effect can stack up to 3 times. So we're going to use, in our rotation, we're going to light attack, Molten Whip, light attack, Molten Whip, light attack, Molten Whip. But we're going to have other Ardent Flame abilities going off. Our next ability is Engulfing Flames. We have this here because it does a lot of damage. As you can see, it does damage up front, damage over 14 seconds. Affected enemies take more damage from all flame attacks based on your offensive stats, with a maximum of a 10% bonus damage taken. As you can see, our current bonus is 9%. Next up, we have Dampened Magic. This is our damage shield. This just helps us stay alive. So we're going to primarily use this. Each piece of light armor worn increases the amount of damage absorbed by 6%. And as you can see, that's a 12k shield, and that will keep you alive pretty well. Alright, moving on to the next ability, we have Coagulating Blood. Now, a lot of people are going to ask why I have this. This is draw on your Draconic Blood to heal you for X amount, increased by up to 33% healing based on your missing health. You gain Major Fortitude, increasing health recovery by 20% for 23 seconds. But the thing is that this spell itself is based off your Max Magicka. So the heal itself is based off your Magicka pool. The healing is based off your missing health. So, as you can see, that's a 16k heal. 10k, 10k. And if I crit, it's going to be a lot higher. And the higher spell damage you have and the higher Max Magicka, it's going to heal for more. And the higher missing health. So, really good ability to keep you alive. And it does cost a bit of Magicka, but honestly, you won't notice too much. Next ability we have is Carterize. Now, a lot of people are going to say, why not Flames of Oblivion? Flames of Oblivion is a really good ability, but because we don't have a heal over time, this is a really good ability for that. What's going to happen is you're going to activate it, and every 5 seconds you're going to heal yourself, and you also get Major Prophecy for having it slotted. And then this ability scales with your highest offensive stats. So the heal is actually going to be based off your Max Magicka and spell damage, and then the, It just works. Alright, moving on. Now, you can use Flames of Oblivion if you want to. That's up to you. I just prefer Cauterize. Next ability we have, of course, is our Standard of Might. And this is our primary used ability. As you can see, it costs us 212 instead of 250. This one, you call down a standard dealing X amount of flame damage every second for 20 seconds. It applies Major Defile to the enemy, reducing their healing and health recovery by 30%. And then standing in the area increases your damage done by 15% and reduces their your incoming damage by 15%. This is just good for survivability overall, especially with all the AoE damage you have going on and everything else. Now moving on to the back bar, and this is where things are going to get questioned again. We're starting with our first ability, which is Unstable Wall of Flame. Now, the reason for Unstable, they adjusted the duration to 10 seconds. So now it deals a decent amount of damage every second for those 10 seconds. Burning enemies take 20% more damage from this ability. And then when the effect ends, the barrier explodes, dealing X amount of flame damage. So really good there. Next up, we have Flame Pulsar. This is for trash fights. Like, if you're in a trash fight, you're not going to be busting out lots of heavy attacks with your two-handed and stuff like that. You're going to be on the back bar mostly using this. Next ability we have is, of course, Molten Armaments. Again, just like our other DK, this one gives Major Brutality and Sorcery, increasing weapon and spell damage by 20% for 36 seconds, and your own damage with fully charged heavy attacks is increased by 50% while active. So when you do a lot of heavy attacks with your fire staff, you're going to get a lot more damage out of it. Next up, we have Volatile Armor. Really great skill, especially for this type of setup, since you're not really going for high survivability as you are going for greater damage faster with that other stuff. This is the other reason why we don't use the Flames of Oblivion and we use Cauterize instead. This one does damage over time. So this gives you Major Resolve, increasing both spell and physical resist, of course, by 5,280 for 20 seconds. And then you release a spray of spikes around you in a 10-meter radius. So it's an AoE, damage over time ability. And then while active, the armor returns magic damage to the enemies that use direct damage against you. Moving on, we have Cauterize again, and this is for the Major Prophecy because we want it on both bars, but it also allows us to keep Cauterize up really well in our rotation. Last ability we have, and this is kind of a floater, you have two options here. We have Magma Shell. Now, Magma Shell gives you a reduced damage by 3% of your max health, and deals flame damage to all nearby enemies for 12 seconds. When activated, nearby allies gain a damage shield that absorbs 100% of their max health for 10 seconds. So it's actually quite nice and small. Like, if you're two-manning stuff, this is really good. The other ability I would suggest, ultimate-wise, is the Destruction Staff, Eye of the Storm. This is a great one. It does cost as much as Banner, but this allows you to cast this, and it creates just basically Grothar again, but around you, and it'll follow you, so it's really good. Alright, now that I've done that, we're going to go over the class passives, skills and stuff that I take, and again, it's up to you to decide which ones you want. So, Ardent Flame, I do take all the active abilities and ultimate, and of course passives. The active abilities I do take, Standard of Might, Molten Whips, Burning Embers. This is actually really good for single target, and it does heal you, and you can swap this out if you want on the front bar for the coagulated blood. It is actually that good. So you can actually just do this if you want, or you can even swap this around a little bit and do something like this. But it does add to your damage, and it does heal you quite a bit. You just basically want to use it to heal you and to keep up that dot damage. So that's something you can do. Then we have Unrelenting Grip. This is primarily for when you're playing in a two-man group or something. You can play some support, pull some enemies in, let them get killed by your AoEs and stuff. It's really nice. And then, of course, we move on to Cauterize. And then Draconic Powers, I do use Fury of Sleep. This has a very powerful flame damage ability. This I use primarily for PvP. Then we have Volatile Armor, of course. We have our Burning Talons. This is a great ability for CC, crowd control, damage over time. Coagulated Blood, we already went over. For Dragon Fire Scales, this is a really great ability to do damage back to your enemies that are shooting with projectiles, and it's any projectile. So, and then we have Deep Breath. Moving on to Earth and Heart, we have Magma Shell. We do have Obsidian Shard here, and we can use this as a spammable as well. It does do flame damage. It's not as good, but it does do splash damage, which is really nice. On top of that, it also does a heal to yourself and to nearby allies. It's another really great way to keep yourself alive. Then we have Molten Armaments. We have our Fragmented Shield. This is just really good for like kind of like group play, or if you're tanking. This is a great one to use because it gives you that major mending. You can throw this in there into your build somewhere. Shattering Rock's really good, and then of course an Eruption for a good AoE damage over time. I do like to use it instead of Flame Pulse, even though it's a lot more expensive. But the reason I like it is it does last a long time. It lasts 18 seconds. It does a decent amount of damage every 18 seconds, and then it does damage on cast, and then it does movement speed reduction. So your choice which one you want to use. I just prefer Pulsar. Alright, weapons. So two-handed, I do unlock the active abilities and the passives, and then with Destruction Staff, of course, the active abilities and passives. Now, I'm not going to go over the two-handed skills because that's up to debate on which ones you would want to run, but when it comes to the Destruction Staff, Eye of the Storm is going to be really good for you. Force Pulse is another really good one to use. Unstable Wall, Destructive Reach is another good one to use. You can even use this almost as a extra damage over time on the back bar if you want, instead of using Pulsar. We have Elemental Drain for if we need to put Major Breach on things, and then of course Pulsar itself. Armor, Light Armor. We are using all 5 pieces of Light Armor, so we are going to take the Dampened Magic from here and all the passives. Now when it comes to Medium Armor, top 2, bottom 1, and then Heavy Armor, all the top 3. World Skills, Soul Magic, we're going to take the ultimate active abilities and all the passives. Moving on to Guild Skills, Fighter's Guild, ultimate active abilities and passives again. And there is a reason why you're going to want to take the passives here, because if you are using a lot of the two-handed abilities, or you want to play a little bit more support in a group, you can use things like Silver Leash. This costs stamina instead of magicka. You can use Ring of Preservation. Just depends on how you play and what you're doing. Dawnbreaker Smiting is really good for PvP and PvE because it does a lot of damage up front, a lot of damage over time, and it's a super cheap ultimate. Mage's Guild, Shooting Star, all the active abilities here, Inner Light, Structured Entropy, Scalding Ruin, Balance, and of course all of the passives. Sigil Order, same thing. Temporal Guard, really good for PvP. Time Freeze, Elemental Weapon, Channeled Acceleration, Symbiosis, and Deep Thoughts. And then, of course, all the passives. And then on Daunted, we're going to take Sanguine Altar, Tangling Webs, Inner Rage, the Magicamorph, Bone Surge, and Mystic Orbs for support. And remember, that's what these skills are here for. They're for synergies, support type things to help your allies. If you're playing in a 2-man to 4-man group, depending, you got abilities that allow you to play a lot of different roles. So, Alliance War, Assault, Aggressive Horn, Echoing Vigor, Caltrops, support skills, Reviving Barrier. I use this a lot when I'm doing like VMA or something like that. You know, something where I need the extra support for myself to stay alive for some of the fights. Efficient Purge, and Stalwart Guard. And then, of course, our racials. We are a Dark Elf, so we are going to take all 3 of the racial passives here. Dynamic is really good for this because you get 1875 extra magicka and stamina. This allows you to hybridize a little bit better. Resist Flame gives you fire resistance and immunity to burning status effect. And then, of course, we have Ruination, which increases both weapon and spell damage. Under crafting skills, Alchemy, Medicinal Use, really good, especially if you're doing a lot of dungeons on solo play, or you're doing a lot of world boss farming, or even like the Abyssal Geyser farming or dragon farming. And this thing can solo dragons. It's difficult, but it can be done. Provisioning, Gourmand, and Connoisseur. Alright, now that you guys have seen all that, let's move on to champion points. Now, champion points are... The blue tree is suggestional. Okay, so if you wanted to, you could go full Magicka there, and it would be probably a little bit better. But let's go ahead and start here. In the red tree, we have 56 in the Ironclad. This reduces damage taken from direct damage attacks by 20%. Moving on over here, we have 31 into Thick Skin. This reduces damage taken from damage over time by 13%. We have 38 in the Light Armor Focus. This is going to increase your physical resistance while wearing 5 pieces of light armor by 3250. This is really important, guys, for solo play. You want survivability. So, 43 in a Hardy, this increases or reduces your damage taken from physical poison disease damage by 10%, and then 43 into Elemental Defender. This reduces your damage taken from Flame Frost, Shock, and Magic damage by 10%. Moving on, we have 40 in a Bastion. This increases the effectiveness of your damage shields by 16%. We have 19 in Quick Recovery, increasing your healing received by 5%. Again, when you solo play, that stuff's important. Survivability is your primary goal. To be survivable, you're kind of like a jack of all trades. You're a tank, a healer, and a damage dealer all in one, and you have to be able to be built around that. Moving on to the green tree, we have 40 in the Warlord, reducing your break free cost by 16%. 16 into Sprinter, reducing your sprint cost by 10%. 16 into Bashing Focus, reducing your bash cost by 10%. And then moving on to the middle tree. And a lot of people are going to ask, why not Tenacity? Well, you're in light armor, you don't really need it. 30% extra resources with another 10%, you don't see much of a difference. Now, if you're using heavy armor or a restoration staff in your build, then you would see a major difference. Mooncalf, 43 points. This increases your stam recovery by 10%, and then 75 into Arcanus. This increases your mag recovery by 14%. Moving on, we have 40 into Tumbling, reducing dodge roll cost by 16%, and 40 into Shadow Ward, reducing block cost by 16%. Remember, when you solo play, you don't just use certain tools to avoid damage or mitigate damage. You use all tools that you have available to do that. So like blocking, dodging, sprinting, you name it, you're going to use it. So why not save resources on it? And that's what the green tree really is about, is saving those resources for that. Moving on to the blue tree, and again, remember, this is suggestional. You don't have to do this. If you wanted to, you could go full on magic damage, which means a different setup. But for the way that I play this build, we have 43 into Bless. This increases your healing done by 10%. We have 23 into Elfborn. This increases your critical damage and critical healing with magic abilities by 10%. We have 43 into Elemental Expert. This increases Flame, Frost, Shock, and magic damage by 10%. We do have 3 into Spell Erosion, and I'll explain why in a minute. But we're going to move on over here. We have 16 into Physical Weapon Expert. This increases your light and heavy attacks with two-handed weapons, primarily, by 10%. Now remember, you get a 50% boost to your heavy attack damage because of the buff you have. You're not going to be doing a lot of heavy attacks on the front bar. You're going to be doing a lot of light attacks with your two-handed, so you kind of want to get that extra 10%. Then we have 16 into Staff Expert. And this increases your light and heavy attacks by 10% with Destruction Staffs and Resto Staffs. So since we get that extra 10% from light and heavy attacks, this is going to allow us greater damage with our character overall. So this is really good when it comes to the fire stuff. Then we have 34 into Master Arms. This gives us a 14% increase in our damage done with direct damage attacks. It's not quite 16%, but honestly, that little 2% you won't notice being gone. Moving on over here, we have 43 into Mighty. This increases physical, poison, disease damage by 10%. We have 3 into Piercing. This increases your physical penetration by 312. And then we have 23 into Precise Strikes. This increases your critical damage and critical healing with stamina abilities by 10%. And then 23 into Thaumaturge, increasing your damage done with damage over time effects by 10%. The thing you have to understand about playing solo again is, especially when you're playing a hybrid character, is you have to build a hybrid. If you're not playing a hybrid character, you don't have to do this. So you don't need the 23 into Precise Strikes, or 43 into Mighty, or the 3 into here, or 16 into here. You can actually go 35, 40, 56, 56, and you should be good. Alright, now that we've seen that, pretty sure you guys want to see what this thing looks like in action. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a quick parse on this precursor here. This is primarily for solo play, because you're going to be fighting mostly overland mobs and overland bosses, delve bosses, dungeon, public dungeon bosses, world bosses, and dungeon, normal and veteran bosses in non-DLC. In DLC stuff, you're going to want to do them on normal, and you got to be good at playing them on normal in order to beat them solo. There are some dungeons that do require 2 people, and so it's better to go in with 2 people. Alright, so let's go ahead and see what this build looks like. So we're going to do all of our buffs. So we're going to do our volatile armor, we're going to do our that buff, we're going to go through the whole routine here. Alright, so as you can see, we did about 18k damage. Now, with dual destruction stabs, you can get about 25k DPS. I'm not going to lie. But I prefer the two-handed sword method because it has cleaving damage. So any enemy you hit with a light attack is going to cleave into other enemies, and it's going to have a chance of proccing that fire enchant. So, let's go ahead and take this into our favorite testing dungeon, of course, which is the Depths of Melitar. And I know a lot of people are like, why don't you use other dungeons? I like Depths of Melitar because it's easy to get to the first boss encounter. Really easy. You just got to go through 2 packs of mobs, and then you're there. And the first boss is that right there. That creepy thing, and it's got really good mechanics. That's all I can say. Like this really does show how well this build can survive. Now, remember, when you're playing solo, you're not going to be getting DPS like you do on a parse dummy. It's going to be a lot different because you're going to be an active, reactive player instead of just an active player. When you play DPS, it's a different story, and this build can play DPS fine. You can probably get up to about 35k DPS with the right stuff, so. Like I said, trash packs, that's a great ability to just clear it. And sometimes I will throw a heavy attack in there and stuff, like I said. But most of the time you don't need it. And this is on normal, but this is a vet DLC dungeon, so you kind of want to be a little bit more prepared for that. Now we are going to go in and face the boss. Now, the boss is, like I said, has some interesting mechanics. If you don't know these mechanics, you will most likely fail. So... And he disappeared. And now I gotta find a trap. Or, because I can't run away. I heard one. There we go. You'd think these things would do a little bit more damage. But the whole point of this demonstration is just to show you the effectiveness of this build. And yes, I'm only soloing in a non-DLC dungeon, or a veteran, or sorry, a normal DLC dungeon, not a veteran base game dungeon. But the base game dungeons are a lot easier than the veteran, their DLC counterparts. So, but that's pretty much it for the Infernal DK, guys. I hope you guys like it. It's one of my, I wouldn't say favorite builds, but it is definitely a build I do like to play, and I think that it works out really well in its design and its structure. And I think that it's something that a lot of people would enjoy playing. So, look at that, I even ran out of food. So, but yeah, it's a really fun build. It's just, it's really interesting to play. And if you, like I said, it depends on your skill level. Like, the more you learn the build, the better it is. And then, of course, even if you're using, like I said, dual fire staves, which you can do, it works out just as good. It's in fact a little bit better when it comes to DPS, because you're getting more fire damage because your light attacks are more fire based. But when you use a two-handed sword, you can get more cleave damage, which is really nice when you're fighting a boss with adds. So, but that is pretty much it for the build, guys, which you guys know what's coming next. If you guys like this video, go ahead and hit that like button. If you guys want to see more videos by me, you can subscribe. Other than that, I want to thank you all for watching. Until next time, have a wonderful day, and this guy might see you in game. Bye.